All right. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So before we dive into our topic for today, which is very ambitiously and vaguely titled Introduction to Digital Humanities and Humanities Data, which of course we'll get into maybe the challenges of why that's maybe too broad, too vague, and difficult to define in a bit. But before we dive into our topic for today, I do want to acknowledge we are living through multiple crises and a lot of challenges. I know a lot of folks probably have the news on in the background, just current events being really challenging for everyone. So I want to pause and acknowledge that this pandemic and other structural inequalities have disproportionately affected people of color, particularly Black and Indigenous peoples. So as a member of the UC Riverside community, I just want to call attention to this and say that I stand with Black Lives Matter against racial injustice, police brutality, and other human rights violations. I also want to, because I'm physically located in the area of Riverside, California, recognize, our responsibility to the original and current caretakers of this land, water, and air, the Cahuilla, Tongva, Luiseño, and Serrano peoples, as well as their ancestors and descendants, past, present, and future. And I know we have folks joining us from all over. So, we're meeting virtually, but I invite you to learn, wherever you're physically located, whose ancestral lands you're located on, at the link on the screen, native-land.ca. So essentially, for this workshop, really do what's best for you. Feel free to engage any way you're comfortable. I think we're going to have a largish group today, which is exciting. We have folks, I think, from all across the UC system and perhaps beyond. So it's great to see you all. And for folks just joining, I'm going to copy the link to the slides again into the chat in case you would like to access these slides or follow along. And again, if folks are comfortable muting themselves as you join, if you notice that you're unmuted. For some reason, the settings got switched around for the meeting today. All right, so as I mentioned, it's a pretty ambitious topic, right? And I'm interested to hear from you all what your interest is in these different aspects of digital humanities. But I'll start off by introducing myself. I'm Rachel Starry. I'm the Digital Scholarship Librarian here at UC Riverside. And the goals, so in thinking about offering a workshop on digital humanities, on humanities data for Love Data Week, I originally kind of conceptualized this as an opportunity for us to talk about what humanities data looks like, across our different disciplines, to really just think through what we mean when we say digital humanities. So kind of for folks who might be new in this arena, just demystifying it, looking at some example projects, things like that. And as I started to kind of, pull things together, it struck me that we're so often very focused on tools and methods. So we're not going to not talk about tools and methods today, but that's not going to be the primary focus. We will look at some example projects and we'll kind of talk about, some of the things people are doing in this sphere. But I want folks to take away from this, if you're new to digital humanities, less of the idea and understanding of DH as, an assemblage of tools and methods, and more, I'd love for us to kind of dig into the why. Why are folks investing so much time and energy developing skills and building out projects? And who is it for? Who's building these things? How are we collaborating? And kind of the ethos of digital humanities. That said, we'll also, I've got a lot of links in this slide deck, talk about some resources for finding humanities data. We'll also kind of just, interrogate that question of what does it mean to be talking about humanities data. So that's the twofold goals for today. Feel free to pop questions in chat. My contact information is here on the screen, and I have a link at the end too to get in touch. But please feel free to share questions at any time. And again, link to the slides is here. So I'm going to launch a quick Zoom poll just to get a sense of who's in the room today. There's a bunch of us. So this poll just has a couple of questions. So I can get a sense, of where you're all coming from, maybe what your interests are, if you'd like to share in chat, maybe the disciplines that you're coming from, where we're all situated institutionally and kind of contextually. leave it open for a couple more seconds. Folks still voting? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and end the polling and share the results. So it looks like about half of us are coming from across the UC system, so welcome. A group of folks from here locally at UC Riverside. Okay, and a couple of folks also a little bit more broadly, which is exciting. It's what we get from making these events more openly accessible. And in terms of roles, okay, that's really interesting to see that we've got about 40% of folks who are staff. A good chunk of our group today is students, graduate students, and other. Yeah, and in the chat, feel free to share if you have particular disciplinary backgrounds. So that's interesting to hear, and I'll pay close attention to the chat if folks start to share kind of the things that you're working on, maybe the disciplinary spaces that you're coming from. So we're here to talk about digital humanities, but I kind of want to back up, especially because my role institutionally is a bit broader. It's more digital scholarship. So a definition, and there are many out there that I like to use for digital scholarship, it really breaks it down simply, right? It's the use of digital tools or methods for a variety of scholarly activities, including research, teaching, and publishing. Perhaps my favorite way of framing this arena of work kind of splits it into an emphasis on both process and product, right? So digital scholarship can be the process of creating new, really varied, often fluid forms of scholarship using different digital tools and computational methods. It can also be used to describe, in that kind of noun sense, the actual things that we're producing using these different technology-dependent research processes. What I really want to emphasize today, though, and kind of interrogate as we look at some example DH projects, is what these sorts of activities and work looks like in a practical sense, right? So digital scholarship, digital humanities is very often project-based work. And what kind of sets it apart from the digital aspect from a lot of humanities research is that it is really intensely collaborative. It's iterative. There's a saying that, DH projects are never done. There's a sense that they're kind of building over time organically a lot of times, getting different cohorts of students kind of joining projects, things like that. This sort of work is often inherently public facing and community engaged. So involving larger collaborative groups, kind of maybe having broader stakeholders and audiences than some other scholarship is conceived of as having. And it's also really fundamentally, in most cases, interdisciplinary, right? And open goes beyond just kind of public facing access side of things to having an ethos of openness, using open source tools, using open scholarship, creating open tools and scholarship. So the reason I kind of start with digital scholarship, in a workshop ostensibly about digital humanities, is that I think it's important to kind of take a step back. On the one hand, especially across the UC system, a lot of libraries, and I know we have some other digital scholarship librarians in the room. So a lot of times libraries are using the phrase and terminology of digital scholarship when we're talking about supporting research and teaching and these different kinds of activities using digital tools and methods. But it's also part of this larger ecosystem that can vary depending on what sort of institution you are located at, depending on where in the world you're located, what discipline you're located in. So I like to kind of conceptualize this and teach this and talk about this as an umbrella, of digital approaches that, look different. So within, all the ways I was just describing digital scholarship as being, interdisciplinary and open and, both process and product applies to all of this. And then digital humanities, of course, is just the way that that's applied in humanistic disciplines. So in Southern California here, we have a lot of institutions just, down the road from where I'm physically located, like Occidental and the Claremont colleges, where the terminology of digital liberal arts is the way that they're kind of framing that for their particular institutional context. And that can look a little bit different than DH at a larger institution like UCLA or other UC schools. And then of course, you know, we're at a research institution here at UCR, but a lot of institutions, including those liberal arts colleges, you'll often see the terminology of digital pedagogy, which is just really focusing on the teaching with digital tools, teaching critical media, you know, literacy, and you know, essentially focusing on the pedagogical aspects of this rather than the research aspects. So this is all, to me, a related ecosystem, and we can't talk about one without the other. And of course, there's different kind of terminology used in different places. So it's useful to look out for that. If folks aren't familiar with this website, I love to bring this up, this whatisdigitalhumanities.com. So this website, every time you refresh it, you get a different definition of DH, because it's often said that there's as many definitions of digital humanities as there are practitioners in the field, right? So this, this pulls from a database of 817 different definitions submitted by researchers. So this is a fun one, a creative ongoing fest where everybody is invited. That's interesting. Let's see what other definitions. Oh, wow. The use of information technology in the conduct and presentation of humanities teaching and research. So this is an interesting site just to explore, to see how other folks are, you know, kind of in a personal sense defining digital humanities. And if folks have your own favorite definitions, also feel free to share those in chat. I'm just going to catch up with chat, folks sharing kind of where you're coming from, what you're interested in learning. Awesome. I apologize too if you hear my cat in the background. All right, so essentially what I'm getting at in kind of rambling about what is digital humanities is that it's not one thing, right? It's not a unified field. This is, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and it's DH and digital scholarship more broadly is just language that we're using to describe a huge range of different scholarly activities. So in talking about what is digital humanities, we could talk about the countless tools and platforms and methods that scholars are using, from programming languages, you know, R and Python, to 3D modeling software, to web content management systems. We'll see things like Omeka, Mukutu, other content management systems, really commonly used. We could also, again, talk about process and product, right? So the different activities, we can go through and kind of define DH as a life cycle of a digital project, everything from the digitization of primary sources to project design, analysis, and, you know, publication. Or we could talk about the outcomes, the actual kinds of products and projects people are creating, right? So digital collections, community archives, podcasts, virtual reality environments, maps, scholarly editions. You'll see all sorts of these different products being produced. But I think for the purposes of today, it's also interesting to think through what are the different types of data that humanities researchers are engaging with, and how does that kind of fit into the ecosystem of digital humanities. So I'm curious, and some folks have already started to share this in chat, but I'm interested to hear from you all. What do you study? And I know a lot of us study, you know, maybe more abstract things, ideas, people, places. But what are the actual physical materials or digital, you know, electronic materials, files that you deal with as you are conducting your research in whatever humanities discipline you are in? Text analysis. Ooh, Russian detective stories, that's cool. Someone earlier said pre-modern literature and art, so digital archives, documents, scores, musical scores, pictures, Twitter data, social media data. So I'm in a previous life before I became a librarian, my training was in Mediterranean archaeology. So I dealt a lot, I investigated the development of urban space in Turkey in the early centuries of the first millennium. So I was dealing with a lot of maps and images and site plans and, photographs of inscriptions, transcriptions of documents. Some other folks talking about different kinds of documents that you deal with. A lot of social media, that's really interesting. So essentially, and I have a reference here on the slide to a keynote that Miriam Posner, who's a faculty member at UCLA, that she gave in 2015 and then posted on her website, called Humanities Data, a Necessary Contradiction. So if you're curious in terms of kind of a researcher's perspective on why we should think about the things, all this stuff that you all are listing in the chat, everything from text to images and other kinds of materials, why should we bother thinking about that as data? She has a really fascinating take on it. So I'd encourage that you read, check that out. But I'll move on to my next slide, which is just kind of listing all these things, right? So we've seen a lot of folks mentioning things like this in the chat. So text, images, audio and video, things like 3D models, and then structured data, right? So things we might, in a more narrow definition of data, quantitative and qualitative variables in tabular format, that kind of thing. Of course, geospatial data, network data, which is kind of fundamentally organized in a different way, other kinds of maybe more traditionally defined data sets. All of these are things that we work with. So I apologize again if you can hear my cat. He's being very loud. He decided this was his time to run around the house. So we really could spend this entire hour just talking about, should we use the word data to describe these things, to describe the things that we're working with? And essentially, the case that I would like to make very briefly in terms of why we would maybe want to use the word data to think about this and to think about how different digital humanities projects are dealing with these different kinds of resources and materials is primarily that there are challenges, right, related to the organization, the storage, the documentation, and the preservation of research materials across all disciplines, right? And those challenges apply equally to the physical and electronic materials that researchers in the humanities are producing, as much as those more narrowly defined, structured, maybe tabular data sets, that folks in different STEM fields, as well as humanities fields, are creating, right? And yes, there are unique challenges to dealing with each of these different kinds of materials, but I think it's really incredibly useful to frame all these kinds of materials that we work with in the humanities as data, because it's, all of those aspects and challenges related to data management and preservation and access and transparency apply as much to collections of images and video and all of this as it does to, tabular data sets. And in some ways, there are more challenges. So for each of these different kind of subsets of, humanities data, there are such a wide range, a huge host of different approaches and digital humanities methodologies for processing and analyzing and creating and organizing and displaying these particular kinds of data, right? So just for text, we have everything from computational text analysis and text mining to, digital literary analysis, natural language processing. And of course, each of these isn't one methodology, but really a category, a whole group of methods. We could talk about text encoding, digital scholarly editing, annotation, the creation of social media data sets through web scraping, all of this. There's such a broad array of ways that researchers in the humanities are engaging with this material and creating projects through them. So rather than kind of going through, I've seen a lot of diagrams out there of people trying to kind of create a cartography or a Venn diagram of all the different approaches in digital humanities. And that can be, really fruitful in some contexts. But what I thought we could do for today was really dive into a couple of different example projects and walk through them. Again, in defining and kind of outlining the spheres of digital humanities today. If you are new to this and you only take one thing away, I would rather us focus and think through what are the kind of values, what is the why and the who of DH is something I'm really keen to investigate together today. And if folks have questions too about the particular, what's and the particular types of methods or tools that are being used in these different projects, we can absolutely get into that as well. So the first project that I would like to look at together is called Teacha. So Teacha is a project that is essentially an interface that lets folks explore texts from a corpus of colonial Zapotec manuscripts. So Zapotec is a series or a group of indigenous languages spoken in Mexico. So this project was, I believe, begun in 2015. It has multiple components. So if we go to the About page, they talk about the project. And honestly, the About page is where I always start. It's the most important piece of any kind of breaking down, deconstructing any project. So they talk about here how this is a corpus that presents particular challenges for engaging with it, not only for scholars, but for anyone. So the purpose of the project, which is a collaborative project, and we can look at the team page next, is to provide access to allow folks insight into this corpus, this body of texts, and allow kind of folks to investigate and read these texts, like with the original document scans alongside transcriptions, translations into English and modern Spanish, linguistic analyses. So really layering all of these different, interpretations and aspects of the text right alongside the actual document itself. So in terms of technology, they are using a variety of different interpretive approaches, as well as TEI. So TEI is the Text Encoding Initiative. So that's essentially a way of marking up plain texts with XML. The project is, it's multi-institutional, cross-institutional. It involves faculty and librarians from, I believe, at least 4 different institutions. So we have folks from Haverford College, from the University of Florida, from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, as well as a couple of other libraries. And it really is an exemplary community engaged project because they actually have folks involved in the project. It's not just kind of scholars on their own who are studying these languages. The advisory board consists of folks who are part of the Zapotec community. They also have students on the project from a variety of different backgrounds. So again, interdisciplinary, collaborative, really public facing and community engaged sort of project. So you can, in this project, explore the language itself. They have this really wonderful dictionary. It's actually a talking dictionary. So you can move through and hear the pronunciations of different words and kind of explore the language itself. They have the actual manuscripts. So if we just look at what this looks like, they have a database of all the different manuscripts with all kinds of metadata and information. And for each of the documents, they have the document itself laid out next to all this metadata, the transcription, as well as if there is an analysis or translation. And it's an in-progress project, of course, right? So there's all different levels of detail available for these different documents. And what I really love, well, they also have ways of exploring kind of through this corpus. So this is kind of another exemplary project in that it layers a bunch of different methodologies and ways of engaging with the materials on one corpus, right? So we have the documents themselves, we have the TEI markup, we have a kind of crowdsourcing aspect, but they're also including a timeline, they're including visualizations of the kind of diversity of the corpus, they have a map, all these different sorts of elements are being layered together in here. And they have several articles and posts about the project, about process, if you're interested in digging in and seeing how they actually made this, right? So again, kind of glossing over the how they made this in lieu of looking at what this kind of project is doing is really my goal for today. So they have teaching modules as well. So if kind of encouraging folks in different contexts, high school education, university level education, in terms of using this project and using these materials. And they actually have multi-language like lessons and chapters and lessons that are going to be coming out later in the future. So really just, I mean, a wonderful project in terms of making text accessible. So the next project that I wanted to look at as kind of an example of ways that researchers in digital scholarship and digital humanities are bringing together collections of images and other sorts of audio and visual materials is the Digital Transgender Archive. So this project is a digital archive based in Boston at Northeastern University, but it's also a search engine that brings together materials from over 60 institutions, archives and collections related to transgender history and other trans communities and history. So you can browse through and see the kinds of collections that are linked in here. So they have a variety of different, like I said, over 60 institutions that are contributing to this. They've also grouped the materials by different collections. If we go to the About page for this, this was a project that began in 2008. And one of the most interesting kind of aspects of this, right, if we're thinking about a project that's bringing together materials from a variety of different archives and collections, and of course, over time, the language that we've used to describe these sorts of materials have changed. The language that's been in use, the metadata has changed significantly. So they talk about some of the challenges that this particular project addresses, right? So in order to address these barriers to the accessibility of the materials and for folks engaging with research on trans history, you know, this is the kind of their goal of the project. And they talk about, you know, their use of the language and all of that. And if we go to, yeah, I believe it's topic, we can kind of see here, these are all the different metadata descriptors of the different kinds of content. And yeah, it's a really fantastic project in terms of making different kinds of collections accessible and available. So there's a lot of digital projects that are like this, right? That create, that lower the barriers to access, that create new pathways in for researchers, for students, for different audiences and publics to engage with materials that they otherwise wouldn't be able to engage with. In terms of audio, I wanted to highlight this particular podcast. So DIG is a history podcast that's created by and produced by researchers. I believe they were actually all graduate students when they first started with this project, and now they're all faculty members at different institutions. But essentially their goal with the project was to bridge the worlds of popular and academic history. So they also bring an explicitly feminist perspective as they talk about these different topics. I love this. And so if we go to, they also have, they have a For Educators page. And this is one of my favorite aspects of this project, right? So there are a lot of academic podcasts out there. But what I believe is really fantastic, and this is something that a lot of digital humanities projects are beginning to do. And as we saw, the Teacha project has this explicitly in terms of providing resources for how folks might teach with or perform research with their tool or the archive or whatever it is that they're producing. So I love that they provide resources for folks who are thinking about either starting a podcast or just getting involved in digital storytelling. They provide some resources. They talk about their audio equipment and distribution, but then they have all of these resources and suggested assignments that educators can take and really just deploy right away in their courses. So I really love this particular project as an example of dealing with or creating audio content that is innovative and I don't know, really exciting. Of course, maps. Maps are a huge kind of subset and component of a lot of digital humanities projects. One of the most kind of impactful projects that I've seen in recent years is Torn Apart Separados. So this is a multi-part project. It was initially created, so there's 2 volumes actually. It was created in 2018, I believe in just a week. They created volume 1. A collaborative team came together and really rapidly created this map as a response to if we go to actually volume 1, it has a little intro. In response to the policies that were put into place in April of 2018 in terms of preventing asylum seekers from entering the United States and separating families at the border. So it's a series of visualizations that essentially gives insight into the geographical and financial and political spread and implications of ICE detention centers. And then volume 2, I believe, was created after the 2018 DH conference, which was held in Mexico City. So the team is, it was created by a team of folks at several institutions, but primarily faculty and librarians. So this one is, it actually combines multiple data sets. So it's pulling in data from ICE facility locations that data set was actually created through FOIA requests and as well as government contracting data. So, and it's built using a number of different JavaScript libraries. So again, a multi-part project, that kind of includes a variety of different ways of layering information, combining data sets on a map. They also have reflection essays that are embedded right in here in the project. So really, really a powerful project. I believe on this page, they actually, again, if you're interested in kind of diving into the specific tools and methods that they use to create this, they have a section at the bottom on the data, where they got the data from, as well as the different JavaScript libraries they use to produce the actual project. And then the last kind of set of projects I wanted to showcase to kind of, talk about these different types of humanities data projects are engaging with, as well as the kind of different approaches within digital humanities, has to do with networks. This journal issue is a set of case studies that apply social network analysis to the ancient world. So it has a variety of studies, and in the interest of kind of getting to the second half of our topic today, humanities data, and looking at some resources, I won't go into each of these, but it's a really fascinating example, of ways that network analysis, a huge area of research, applying network theory to different kinds of networks. So in this case, it's primarily political and social networks in Greek and Roman, literature and society in different places. But network analysis, of course, is applied super broadly, everything from epidemiology to infrastructure, literally studying road and electrical networks, things like that, ecological networks. So as we get into looking at data sources, I will kind of spotlight some of the different kinds of network analysis as well. Very briefly, I do want to kind of address this topic of research is research. So why are we still making a distinction between digital humanities? Why are we not just talking about this as humanities research? Why call attention and call out digital scholarship as something separate from all scholarship, right? So I have a couple of reasons I want to just run down, kind of make a case for why we need to keep talking about this as a separate thing, right? So the number one thing is funding, right? Digital projects often require the purchase of hardware or equipment, or they take particular expertise to develop new platforms or software, additional time to learn new skills. The nature of a lot of different kinds of digital research really relies on processes, like digitization of physical materials, or different tools to analyze born digital materials. Essentially, there are systemic inequalities baked into research funding in general, and we should be talking about this for all research, but because community engaged research, open scholarship, and public communities are all generally underfunded to begin with, I think it is really important that we kind of talk about the value of this work and also acknowledge the realities of what it costs to do this kind of research. Another thing that kind of is baked into the nature of digital scholarship is, and the way that it might differ from a lot of other kinds of scholarship in different humanities disciplines, is that it is fundamentally collaborative, right? A lot of these projects really require the collaboration of people with different backgrounds and skill sets. So, students, content experts, technical experts, and educators who might be situated, as I think we're seeing just with the group today, in different contexts across institutions, right? So it's important to acknowledge the challenges that digital projects face in terms of compensating the labor contributed by a variety of staff members, contingent faculty, postdoctoral researchers, etc. We also talked, or I shared in the definitions of digital scholarship, that there is very often an emphasis of process. And again, it's often said that DH projects are never finished. Yes, and as Shulia just shared in the chat, they often, sustainability is a real challenge. That said, very often the tangible benefits of performing this research come from that ongoing iterative process, right? Maybe more so than any kind of final product or outcome. So maybe your project is creating a community archive or a digital scholarly edition that does have some kind of ideal fixed final form. And obviously it really is worthwhile to talk about scope and sustaining sustaining a project and thinking through what the ultimate goals and reasonable timelines are for accomplishing those goals in the project. But realistically, a lot of digital projects need to, by their nature, get developed kind of over time and bursts of activity, bringing different groups of students onto the project, things like that. So this emphasis on process does kind of call for really kind of thinking about how this is different from other things like a book project, things that might be more temporally grounded. There are also, within the nature of this type of work and these different types of approaches, unique challenges to how researchers share their work, right? Very often, a digital project can't be reduced to a static form. It consists of a complex mix of, a database, the code used to create it, if it's a digital collection, if it's got narrative layered in. So it's really worth talking about digital scholarship and digital humanities as a distinct entity, at least until institutionally the wide variety of ways that scholars are creating knowledge is acknowledged and given equal credit. And then finally, preservation. I think I saw some folks here who it's part of your kind of core job to deal with preservation. There are, it takes different approaches to archive and preserve the components of digital projects. compared to book and article manuscripts, for example, right? Because it takes such varied form, and the functionality of a DH project can be so highly dependent on the systems that it uses to run, software and hardware. So that's very kind of cursory, hopefully useful glimpse into kind of some of the different aspects. Again, if folks are new to this space, I guess my whole goal today was that you walk away thinking about digital humanities, not as, again, a set of tools and methods, but more kind of an ecosystem of practices, and thinking about, the ethos that underlies all of that and the goals for all these projects. So in the last couple of minutes, I just want to share some general resources for finding different kinds of data. So if we're talking about, again, that narrow conception of data, data sets, tabular data sets, geospatial data, all that sort of thing, but also some resources for different kinds of image collections, audio and video, network data, that sort of thing. So I'm not going to go through and click on each of these and go through again. I'll share the link again in chat, actually, if you would like to access these slides and follow up on some of these links. But I just want to call attention in particular to some resources for folks in the UC system. So Dryad is the data repository used by the University of California. So it is available for all UC community members to upload data to. It is also a great place to see where other researchers, including researchers in the humanities, are sharing their materials. So you can search. There are subsites on here, or you can search by researchers at different campuses. So if you're curious, or if you're looking for particular materials being shared in, say, your discipline at your particular institution, Dryad's a great place to look, as well as to consider sharing your materials if you're creating them. R3 is not a single repository. This is a registry of many repositories. But what I like about this particular assembling of different places to look is that you can browse by subject. So if you go to R3 data, you can search if you're looking for a really specific type of data. You can also browse by subject. So they've got, they've kind of organized different repositories into, subjects. So if you're looking in particular, for, say, history, you can search by, let's see, history of science, I believe this one is. So you can kind of filter down for different topics, for different subjects, and see the sorts of some repositories you might want to look at to find data. ICPSR is it's often thought of as more of a social science resource. It's hosted at the University of Michigan, but they have a lot of really wonderful data, and I'd encourage you to check it out. And in particular, they've got some thematic data collections that are really wonderful sources of humanities data or humanities relevant research materials. So for instance, they have the National Archive of Data on Arts and Culture, as well as a number of other really fantastic data sources. Google has a dataset search. Not going to click over onto that one. Useful to know about. A really commonly cited digital humanities specific resource for finding collections and datasets is Alan Liu's website. So this is a curated list of resources for folks in digital humanities. So what I really like about his curated kind of collections and datasets is that he breaks it down so you can kind of search. If you're looking for text corpora, he has some recommended ones, some specific document and image collections, map collections, etc. So this is actually a really, really valuable resource to poke around if you are looking for digital humanities data sets. And then we have, I just had this example here at UCR, we have a library research guide on primary sources. This kind of comes back to terminology and definitions, as we were talking about earlier, right? A lot of times libraries will talk about digital scholarship. We also talk about data using a lot of different terminology, right? So it's useful to kind of see in terms of what's being offered at your particular campus, if there are particular research guides to searching different kinds of databases, right? Again, depending on the kind of materials you're looking for, this is a really fantastic guide here. And I believe they're really robust research guides at virtually all the UC libraries. So I'd encourage you to check those out. In terms of some of the other specific sorts of data types that, humanities researchers in particular engage with, it can be challenging sometimes to find, if you're doing like text mining or wanting to analyze, text corpora, to have some example, texts or sources for text data. So these are some really wonderful resources for finding text data. So HathiTrust Digital Library is, of course, a really wonderful resource in general. So it makes the text data from public domain works in its collection, which the UC libraries and system contributes a huge percentage. So you can actually get the text data from public domain works in its collection, but you can also get what is called extracted features data. So for things that are not in the public domain, you can still get some information about, word counts, word frequencies, different information from the data set. So it's worth checking this out for that. This is a great GitHub repository that lists a lot of different free or public domain data sets that have text data. It's geared towards folks doing natural language processing, but it might be of use in other circumstances. JSTOR has the JSTOR data for research. This may actually be changing in this coming year. For right now, they offer some sample data sets, and researchers can request larger full text data sets that include the actual full text. There's also, again, some of that kind of summary extracted data from the text of JSTOR content. But they're launching a new platform soon, so this might actually look a little bit different in the coming months, but useful to know about. Project Gutenberg, another kind of well-known resource. I believe they have over 60,000 books and in their collection. And then just an honorable mention here for Perseus. So this is primarily materials in Greek and Latin. They also have some other texts. They even have, this is really specific, I'm not sure the history of why the Richmond Times-Dispatch is part of their collection, but a good place to look for certain kinds of text. In terms of images, audio, video, right, there's a lot of resources out there. And I want to call attention just a couple of them. So Calisphere is the University of California's site for browsing digital collections. It has a huge amount of materials, not just images, but a variety of different types of collections and data contributed by a really wide variety of, so all of the UC institutions, as well as different state partners, so different public libraries and museums. So they have a really wonderful, it's a really wonderful place to search for collections held in the University of California, as well as other parts of California. The Digital Public Library of America, this is an aggregator of content from a huge number of institutions and collections across the US. So you can search the collection, you can browse. They have some wonderful exhibitions on here. There's also different kind of collections that they've grouped on the site. They have, again, guidance for using this for different kind of research or educational purposes. So really great aggregator of content, DPLA. The New York Public Library digital collections. So both the NYPL and Library of Congress have both public domain collections as well as collections that are more governed, that you have to check out the right statements that might not be public domain, but are available for research and teaching. So both really wonderful, wonderful online collections aggregators to check out. In terms of other kinds of audiovisual content, the Internet Archive is, of course, a really fantastic resource. So they've got a huge variety of different types of materials on here. Currently, it looks like, I believe they have 6.5 million videos, 15 million audio files. They even have software. Again, you can browse by collection contributors. The California Digital Library has contributed almost 200,000 items. So a really fantastic resource, in particular if you're looking for film and audio and video clips. Europeana is a bit like the DPLA in that it is aggregating works from a huge variety of European archives, libraries, and museums. They also have really wonderful exhibits and resources for educators. It's a fantastic kind of place to investigate for European-based materials. And then Critical Commons is more of a, not crowdsourced, but built by researchers, built from the ground up kind of. So it is a fantastic resource for, in particular, video. So it's, if you are familiar with Scalar at the ANVC at USC, Scalar is a really wonderful digital humanities platform. So Critical Commons is actually one of the archives that they work with, and that allows you to kind of pull in materials right into that platform. So a great source of researcher produced and shared materials, particularly video. And then network data. I just have a couple of resources here. I won't click on them. We're running a bit short on time, but I get frequently asked, where do I find network data? So Gephi is one of the most commonly used tools for network visualization and analysis. So they have some recommended data sets. I really like the list, the kind of curated list of data sets on Francois Briat's awesome network analysis GitHub repository as well. And then Stanford has their large network data set collection, as well as there is a network data repository at Irvine. So these are really fantastic places to look for social network, infrastructure network, all different kinds of network data sets. And then just kind of a, an overall recommendation, if you're looking for local and regional archives or, particular special collections, right? So university archives and special collections vary so widely. I have a link here to Riverside's special collections and notable collections, but it's really worth, again, checking your institutional, library's website for their research guides and their recommendations for, local and regional archives. And then this is a maybe lesser known, more library focused resource, but you can search the kind of, because libraries across the United States, across the world, librarians are spending, a lot of energy creating guides to their local resources. Apologies. So you can actually go on here and search for guides created by librarians across different institutions on different topics. So this is kind of a hidden gem of a resource. Apologies. So I have a couple of, I'm going to exit full screen. I have a couple more slides with resources for things like finding DH tools and software, project planning, and then there's a question in chat. Will these slides be made available? Yes, we'll send out a link to the slides in the follow-up email for everyone who registered. Let me also, I apologize, I'm losing my voice. Pop a link right here in the chat. So this is the link that goes to this slide deck. So you can access these now if you would like. but a bunch of, I know, we kind of breezed through all these resources, but the recording for this will be made available, and I do really hope that this was a kind of helpful overview. I know it was kind of a whirlwind just looking at a lot of different projects and resources, but I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll stick around for a few minutes if folks have particular questions. For folks who are local here at UC Riverside, you can always get in touch with the library, and for all of you at different UC systems, I know it's the same at your own libraries. So let me very briefly share a link to a workshop assessment if you have a few minutes, or really just 1 minute to fill this out. This link goes to a very, very brief survey. But thank you all for being here. And please, if you have questions, I will monitor the chat and stick around for a few minutes. Thank you.